Good morning, everybody. This is Zach Ackerman with Dennison Consulting. We're going to give ourselves just a few more seconds to get started as we flip over to 10 a.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. Wonderful. So welcome once again to Dennison's Consulting Partner webinar series. Here in July, we'll be talking about the connections between culture and safety. Joining me, Zach Ackerman, Director of Business Development here at Denison, is Jay Richards, one of our senior consultants. Jay is actually a founding associate of Dennison Consulting back in 1998 and now serves a number of clients, particularly mid and large size manufacturing and oil and gas companies with a significant focus around safety initiatives. Today, what we want to accomplish is to give you the reassurance and the confidence that culture and safety are closely correlated and linked concepts. That is, that culture is a primary driver of a safe work environment. And then help you understand what those links between culture and safety really are. What are those cultural drivers, those elements of a high-performing culture that help create a safe environment? And finally, help bring to life what high-performing, safe organizations do and have in common. Jay is going to be walking us through this. Throughout the course of our 45-minute webinar, if you have any questions whatsoever, please use the chat function, and we'll address your questions at the end. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Jay to begin.
Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon and good evening for any of those outside the U.S. and all over the world. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, Zach. We're going to do what I love to talk about, which is culture, and specifically today is culture and how it links to safety. One of my articles that I wrote years ago in Industry Week was called The Impact of Culture on Safety. And I've got some slides on that that we'll show here in a minute. But when you look at some of the, the comments that also come out of the surveys, which people type in and things, one of my absolutely favorite lines was from a woman up in Canada at a really high-performing plant that really, to me, had safety down. And one of the things that she said was, culture is not a priority here. It's a value. And it's because priorities change, values do not. You know, and I look at that and I think to myself, gosh, she could be a poster child for what we do, right? Because they really get it. And it also speaks a lot about just being an employee, what the rest of the organization has been preaching and doing over the years to set a foundation for a strong culture, but also a strong safety culture. What we have here, just before we get started, I'm sure we got a lot of people on right now, so I'm sure some of you really know the Dennison model, maybe some not so much. But as we go through this, you're going to see the circular profile, which is our model, which is broken down into red, mission, yellow is consistency, green is involvement, and blue is adaptability. We also don't just provide mean scores, and on a scale of 1 to 5, right? We actually present it back in the form of a benchmark database of over 1,000 organizations. So as you see some of these profiles that I'm going to show you, it's basically where you rank in that database. Because if I give you back a score of a 3.2 on how you communicate vision, that doesn't tell you much, right? It might tell you you're slightly above the neutral point of a 3, but a 3.2 doesn't give you any context. However, when I take that 3.2 and I put it into a database of 1,000 plus other organizations and it puts you in the 70th percentile, now you know you beat 69% of those companies in the database, right? And that's actually a good thing. Conversely, if it actually puts you in the 10th percentile, that tells you 90% of the people scored higher than you. And that's why we do a benchmark database. It gives you a relative idea of the strength or weakness of either the item score or the benchmark benchmark index, okay? So that's the model in a nutshell. Anybody that needs further explanation, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to share it with you. But here, a few years back, well, actually, no, it's more than a few years back. That's how time flies when you're having fun, right? In about 2010, I was doing a research project. And one of the things, having worked with enough organizations, You know, a lot of people talked about what is the relationship of culture. OSHA, if you go into OSHA, you'll see a lot of things around culture. As we went into manufacturing plants and things, you hear a lot about culture. But what did anybody really look at the relationship of a good culture to safety or a bad culture to safety? So sitting on a pile of data that we've collected over the last 20 some odd years, I thought to myself, gosh, you know, I could probably take a lot of the manufacturing plants that we have in our database at the time, collect their Form 300s or their OSHA stuff that they report back, and actually be able to tie our culture survey that they've done on their plants to what their safety records look like. And so what you're seeing right here is out of the 85 manufacturing plants that we had in the model that did both the culture plus that we had safety data for, what you're looking at is just the extremes. Now, the data correlated, all 85 correlated to recordable cases and LTA cases, but these are just showing the extremes of the top 20% versus the bottom 20%. And the top 20% had roughly 17 plants in it, and the bottom 20% had 17 plants. And what you find is that, you know, 82% of those high-performing plants, so of those 17, 14 out of 17 had 0 LTAs. And I'm assuming, you know, if you're on this call, you probably know, right, that an LTA is a lost time accident, which is an accident that occurs in a given day, but that you're out the next day and so on. A recordable is day-to-day types of things that happen. But what we find is, and if you look at those 17 plants, 14 out of 17 had 0 LTAs. The bottom, of course, 5 of them actually had, of the 17, had 0 LTAs. But the real thing, when I met with, as I was doing this study, I met with some people at OSHA over in the state of Michigan, and they were talking to me, you know, I was showing them the profile. They're like, yeah, you know, there's some plants where you can get lucky, where you got that 1 year, but the real true measure is the recordable cases. And here, when you're looking at all of those 17 plants combined, there were 18 recordable cases versus 110 for those on the bottom 20%, which to me basically says culture does. And is that something new? I don't know. I don't think it's nothing new. I think deep down inside, everybody knows culture has an impact on safety.
So Jay, what I'm hearing is, without knowing anything else, when we look at an organization's culture against the Dennison model, which is how we measure it, a high-performing culture that is a very full, high-scoring culture profile, which we see on the right, is going to produce a much safer environment. And that can be measured through the actual metrics they report to federal agencies.
Oh, for sure. I mean, when, you know, give an example, I was working with a large multi-billion-dollar manufacturing plant, Zach, and we had just finished up the survey with all of their 70 plants all over the world. And one of the things I like to do if they're going to do a culture survey is help the executives put their money where their mouth is, to show them that this can actually have an impact. So I already done this study, right? So that was 2010, 2011. 2013 is when I was working with this client. So I went to the CHRO and I said, hey, if you give me all of your recordables and your LTA, your safety records on each individual plant, what I will do is I'll correlate it to their culture survey. So when we present it to the CEO, CFO, and all the rest of the executive team, we can just show them how it impacts with your own organization, not just using this profile that I've got up on the screen, but we'll do it with your own data. And I said, just so you know you're not wasting your time, based on your culture results, here are your 3 lowest or your 3 safest plants, and these are your 3 lowest, just by looking at their culture results. He sent me the data that night, and he said, geez, Jay, because 2 of the plants that you said would probably be the worst are actually in safety audits, and the 3rd is going into a safety audit soon. So really, I mean, it has a huge impact.
And that's what studies like this aim to do. They aim to give you the confidence that when we say these are the 12 aspects of organizational culture that business leaders need to pay attention to if they care about their metrics, we mean it. And those metrics can be measured through safety metrics as well.
Sure, you bet. So one of the things that we did as well is we have a safety module. So since that article took off years ago, we've developed safety modules. And a lot of these things are engagement module, because you've got the culture survey, right? But a lot of people are looking for a little bit more. So we've got safety module, we've got the engagement, the trust, the innovation module. We're coming up with a diversity and inclusion module. These are add-ons to the survey. But one of the things I wanted to do for this one, knowing that this was coming up today, is I took a lot of the organizations, which are about 230 organizations that have done this safety module plus the culture over the last 2 or 3 years, right? And basically, these are some of the things that we look at, right? And this is an example of the safety module, which is all leaders demonstrate strong commitment. And these are benchmarked as well. But if you see at the top, that safety, that's the index score of 48. What I decided to do for this was let's just take a look at the culture and drive that into the safety index. And what I mean by that is we're going to take the culture survey results of the 230 organizations and correlate, and looking for, when I say drivers, we're looking for the highest correlators of the safety or the culture items to the safety index. And by that, you just take a top 10 of what's the highest correlation, okay? Zach has a question.
That is, what are the 10 cultural behaviors that at a macro level are most directly linked to a high safety culture?
Exactly, thanks, Zach. And so when you look at this, here's an example of how it plays out, right? So basically what I did is I took the top 50 organizations of the 230 that scored the highest, the top 50 highest on the safety index, and the profile on the left are the top 50 of the lowest, okay? And then we look at their culture. And once again, this is no different from the profile I showed you before. I mean, it's pretty consistent any way we look at it, that, whether you're in the top 20% or the bottom top 50, you still see the high cultures are driving the higher safety environments. But this is, to me, kind of the important thing. And all of the work that I've done and looked at over the years, this is basically how it came out. And this goes from the top correlator to the 10th correlator, which is decisions are usually made at the level where the best information is available. When disagreements occur, we work hard to achieve win-win solutions. Our vision creates excitement and motivation for our employees. Cooperation across different parts of the organization is actively encouraged. People work like they are a part of a team. We have a shared vision of what the organization will be like in the future. The leaders and managers practice what they preach. We seldom have trouble reaching agreement on key issues. People understand what needs to be done for us to succeed in the long run. And there's a widespread agreement about goals.
So as we move forward, we're going to talk a little bit about each of these drivers and what high-performing or very safe environments have in common. And as a reminder, as we move through each of these 10, if you have any questions or would like to run specific examples by us or situations by us, please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom.
Yeah, and also make notes on some of this, because it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on some of these and maybe how they play out. Because I see a lot of these things as we go through that I've seen play out in the organizations that I work with. But the first one, decisions are usually made at the level where the best information is available. My guess is, if you're into safety, this one, right? This is not only just in safety, this is lean, this is quality management and things like that. We always say that, you want to push a lot of the decisions down to the lowest possible level. A lot of times when I'm in organizations, whether it's safety or it's quality, waste, whatever, a lot of the employees, if it's pushed down at them from someone up above, they don't buy into it. But when you do push it down to that lower level, and I remember talking to the safety director one time, he says, Jay, he goes, you know what? I know what needs to be done. And almost always, if I push it down, they'll come up with the same exact thing. It just takes 2 or 3 days longer than I'd like. But when they come up with it, when people come up with it, they tend to buy into it more, and then they want to really make sure it succeeds. And that's a good point, you know. And then, so I think this, to me, is kind of a no-brainer. This actually did not surprise me whatsoever. When disagreements occur, we work hard to achieve win-win solutions, you know. Here, you know, we have to have agreement that if safety occurs, we can talk about them openly without fear of reprisal. You know, that's a big thing, right? You know, in poor performing cultures where I worked, so often, you know, you'll hear this thing about, you know, when they do have a fairly decent safety record, although I find that they can't really hide behind, you know, from it. But you'll hear this, people talk about, you know, mostly with recordables, because you can't really dodge the LTA too easily, but, you know, with at least the recordables, you know, people might have a fear, and that's a statement that the leadership has made, meaning not necessarily the upper leadership, but more supervisory level down on the floor, where they may make it, it's an unspoken thing. And we always want to make sure, you know, great cultures get it out there because they actually learn from that. So why hide it when we could actually learn from it? And that would save us in the long run for something even worse, right? Our vision creates excitement and motivation for our employees. To me, this speaks so much broader about the culture itself, right? And I think a lot of it, why this is so important, is that people, on something like this where you're excited and you're motivated, it means you really buy into the culture. The organization's created an organization that people want to work for. And an example that I often give, one of my favorite, and they're not even a client of ours, wish they were, but it's because they get it. Southwest Airlines, an organization that's been profitable for decades. And one of the things that, if you look in their annual reports, they have a statement that says, "We are a company of people, not planes." Okay? So what that tells me is they understand that they buy the same planes as their competitors, but they choose to differentiate their product from point A to point B based on their people's experience, knowledge, and how they execute, right? That's what they chose. By saying we are a company of people, not planes, that's how they're going to approach. That's how they're going to approach you, their competitors, to get their competitive advantage. And so I think, to me, something like this, where people are excited and motivated, just tells me that they're actually buying into that culture. The next one, cooperation across different parts of the organization is actively encouraged. So here, to me, what this means is the organization is probably described as family. A lot of times when you look at high-performing cultures, some of the other research we've done, one of the biggest things that I see in organizations where employees are trying to describe strengths that are high-performing, they refer to this team orientation, or what they'll typically describe as family, okay? And so here, you know, people look out for each other. Everyone is engaged in safety, from those in the front lines, but also to the corporate offices. So as Zach mentioned, I work with oil and gas. So one of my clients is Exxon Mobil, and we do a lot of coaching and stuff there. And you go into Houston, into this huge complex, beautiful complex with 10,000 employees. And as you pass through the gate, the next thing that you see is a board that tracks their lost time accidents daily. And so as you go in, so basically what it says is that, you know, it's not just the refineries that are thinking about safety, it's the corporate offices that are thinking about safety. So as you walk around there, your first time, you're getting coached that if you're walking up some steps, you better have your hand on the handrail. If you're driving in, you better tell your Uber driver to drive the speed limit because they will call you out, and everybody from the CEO to CFO all the way down to any employee will look out for you. And that's a pretty cool thing, right? People work like they're a part of a team. You know, we trust our brothers and sisters. We have their backs. We feel comfortable calling each other out because we honestly believe that we want all of our people to go home with all their fingers and toes, right? It's not just something that we are doing because it saves us money. You know, really good cultures look at it as they honestly want to see people go home safely. And that's a pretty cool thing. We have a shared vision of what the organization will be like in the future. Once again, to me, this speaks more to how people see the organization and the culture that's developed. People are not only aligned around the vision, but feel the values as well. They feel, you know, when you walk into an organization, and the guy, going back to the guy from OSHA that I'd met with when I was first doing a lot of that research and things like that, and he was telling me, he's like, Jay, you know what? You know, I know you talk a lot about culture linking to safety, and I still believe this. He's not going to change my mind, but he says, you know, if you get the safety right, you probably got a pretty good culture. He was just going at it a little bit differently, but honestly, it is truly, you know, when you look at engagement and when you look at innovation modules and things like that, safety is a lot, it's different. It's kind of the human thing where we really are looking out for each other. And having that as a part of the DNA of an organization, I think, is incredibly important. The leaders and managers practice what they preach. This is where I spend most of my time in my life, right? I do a lot of coaching with a lot of my clients on supervisors, managers, and executives as well. But what I love is getting right down there with those that are managing hourly people. And then this is where the rubber meets the road, right? They've got to live those values out, period, you know, and you can't just say and put up on the walls. There's nothing worse than putting up safety as number one, and then, you know, your manager comes up and says, well, okay, that's okay. I know safety was number one last week, but we really need to hit these numbers by Friday. You can't do that. That's a short-term type of thing. And, you know, you need people out there on the floor, these supervisors, managers, and leaders at all levels, looking for the long term, right? Because all it takes is one incident where we're not doing it and everybody told you that we shouldn't be doing that, and then things blow up. So, you know, practice what they preach. Having that empathy for other human beings at any given moment, being able to stop that line, you know, if things are being seen as unsafe, being able to call not only your employees out, but employees being able to call you out as well. Vital. Practice what they preach. We seldom have trouble reaching key agreement on issues. In essence, man, we have to know what's right and what's wrong, right? That's kind of, to me, was a no-brainer as well. We have people understand what needs to be done for us to succeed in the long run. You know, people understand the rules and they follow them. This is because they help develop them, hopefully, right? High-performing cultures engage their people in dialogue, not only around safety, but quality, productivity, wage, satisfaction, and so on. To me, that goes back to the culture as well. And that goes back, if you're leaders, how you connect people to the success of the organization. So safety, how we connect it to what it means, the empathy side, that we want you to go home safe. Quality, what it means to the longevity of our organization if we produce quality products. Productivity, what it means to gaining efficiencies in the plant, to create efficiencies so we can grow and create more work. All of these things, being able to get employees to see at different levels what it means to be successful in the organization. So that didn't surprise me that one popped up either. And then finally, there's widespread agreement about goals. You know, everyone is clear. Safety is number one. And everybody from the CEO, once again, down to an hourly, gets that. Very critical. Okay?
So as we move forward, this has been a terrific learning process for me as well, and that's why I love these webinars, is pulling in different members of the Dennison team to share the things that they work on with individual clients, but also the research that they do to corroborate what recommendations they make to their clients. And I think one of the most interesting things that I've learned from this exercise, what are these top 10 drivers of a safe culture, is the patterns that we see in the distribution to the Dennison model, right? The Dennison model is the 12 aspects of organizational culture that our 30 years of research and experience link to performance. And when those performance metrics are safety metrics, I'm hearing a lot of trends around vision and core values and team orientation, so that when I go to a client and I see lower scores in vision, when I see lower scores in core values, when I see lower scores in team orientation, and I know that they have a safety issue,
Right.
I know that's probably where I need to start my digging and understanding and helping them to develop and drive action. And I think that's a really powerful thing, that we can take these macro concepts of 230 organizations around the world and use that information to inform how we approach our clients, how we approach engagements, and improve the safety of organizations as measured through the metrics that they care about, LTAs, the actual financial cost, and the safety and the fingers and toes of all their employees.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, that's there's in a lot of organizations as they go through this, Zach, what you might find is, some of them might be right on, spot on. So even though a couple of these correlate high, but they might already be scoring high. So it's like a priority matrix, right? You say, okay, good, keep up the good work. We've got that aspect down. But we might need to focus on, managers practice what they preach, so we might be communicating that and getting people to buy in at a large scale. But where our area is that needs to be improved is that the supervisory level. Maybe we haven't developed our people. Maybe they don't share the same vision that our executives do. And if they don't, that's getting in the way for us to get where we want to go. So you use a lot of this stuff. Again, to look at, am I low score, high correlator, high score, keep up the good work. Low correlator, low score, high score, maybe we don't need to focus on that. But if I got a high correlator, low score, boom, that's my area of focus. It almost becomes the roadmap of improving your culture.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And just in case people don't know, that prioritization matrix that Jay just talked about, looking at the correlations between your culture data and your safety module data, that is the bolt-on short assessment that measures safety management practices in an organization. That's a service we can provide. We call that a driver analysis. And essentially it looks at the exact organization that you have in front of you with the exact employee population you're dealing with, and we'll figure out what are the different behaviors in that organization's culture that you need to reinforce and sustain, and what are those behaviors in the culture of the organization that you need to change to create a safer environment. And that's something that we can provide for you, and you should ask any of your Dennison contacts about. So with that, I think we'll turn to questions, and it looks like we already have a few. If you think of a question later, please take note of my contact information. It's also been circulated via email a few times, and we'll be sending a follow-up with a recording of this webinar, in addition to some research articles and other resources around culture and safety. But the first question we have coming from the UK is, could we repeat this process within healthcare for maternity and neonatal services?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, in healthcare, safety is probably huge. It's just going to be a different way of looking at it. You might look at patient quality of patient care, patient satisfaction, things of that nature would be vitally important. It definitely would. You're going to see probably the similar correlations that we would find in manufacturing.
Beautiful. We have another question. Do managers tend to overestimate the scores when you segment?
Oh, yeah. So one of the common patterns that we'll see, and whenever I'm setting one of these things up for my clients, there's no way I'm going to leave off level. Level is just fascinating. And a lot of the things that you'll see when you compare managers, supervisors, leaders against the employee staff, that tells me a lot about the organization. And it also gives me an idea of when I'm going in to do an executive debrief, what I'm going to run into. So for example, if I see leaders are a full profile, manager and staff are a full profile, I've probably got a pretty effective organization that's pretty well aligned. But if I see a staff profile that is what we would call our donut of doom, which is very little color and low percentiles, like 1, 1, 1, 1 across the board. I see employees like that and leaders are full profile. That tells me I'm going to have to deal with a lot of denial, resistance, and they're probably going to be blaming the results on a lot of external things and not really owning it. Then if I see a low profile employee, low profile leadership, it's probably they've done it because they're confirmed that they need confirmation that they got a bad culture. But one of the things that I almost always see, though, is that leaders, yeah, they tend to overestimate themselves a little bit. Not on the second survey. Once they figured out the whole benchmarking thing, they kind of get back to a little bit of reality. But yeah, that question, for sure. But in more so, it tells you a lot about the organization. So if you're walking into that and with a leadership team, just that profile of manager, non-manager will tell you a whole lot about that organization on whether they're aligned or not aligned.
Thank you, Jay. Our next question actually diverges a little from the immediate context and says, are there any insights or experiences you have for higher education? And while we have done some work in research labs in higher education around safety, safety generally isn't the focus of higher education institutions. Generally, they're often engaging around culture as they move from a focus on research to student satisfaction, for example, as a key metric, or are in financial distress and having to make decisions of how to run more leanly as an administration. Those tend to be the contexts in which our assessment tools and our consulting services are deployed in higher education. Likely the areas of the Dennison model you'd focus on to achieve the metrics that higher ed institutions care about may look slightly different than those you would focus on for safety. But I think an important link is you'll note, strangely enough, that vision appeared as a cultural driver or theme in our safety conversation. And as we look at all the different metrics that we track and correlate back to the Dennison model, vision pops up time and time again across almost every metric that organizations care about, from employee engagement to EBITDA to safety. And vision can often be referred to as kind of the first among equals of the different Dennison traits and indexes, simply because without that long-term vision, direction, and purpose of who you want to be in the future, it's very difficult for the rest of the pieces to fall into place.
Well, yeah, and I think, like I said, I think it says a lot about their culture. Yeah. Of the organization. That's why people resonate with that.
Exactly.
They're in an environment. That's why more and more you hear, when I'm working with HR professionals specifically, they keep getting the question where a lot of even the millennials will ask, what's the culture like? What's the culture like here? I had one, it was a insurance organization, and they'd worked their profile out from a donut of doom out to over a 5-year period to a full profile. And so when they would get that question, they'd actually pull out their Denison profile and say, oh, let me share it with you,
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So another question, and before I do, looks like two requests to schedule a follow-up call. Yes, please feel free. I'll be sure to follow up with the two of you to schedule a call. But returning to the questions at hand, the next one is, what about safety in relation to toxic environments? People don't feel safe. That's a question coming from Missouri. I gather that's around psychological safety. And that's my read of the question. Feel free to clarify.
Well, I mean, not just psychological. It depends on the environment.
Sure.
So if it is manufacturing, they don't feel safe because people are not. Well, once again, when they sweep them under the rug, you get into a steel manufacturing plant that I work with here, when you got a big old steel roll that drops off not once, but multiple times, people take note of that stuff. So if they don't feel safe, they're going to leave. So, to me, if that's the case, if I heard someone describe it as toxic, that's the first thing I would actually do is just go out and get the culture survey would always be, to me, my thermometer, okay? So what I'm going to do, just like a doctor would do, if I'm going to go and analyze, I'm going to do my metrics. What do? You get your blood pressure, your thermometer done, right? Boom, there, okay? You're 102. Now I know. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to ask questions. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk to people and conduct focus groups with employees without managers present. I'll do managers separately, but I'll always do, one of the first things I ask when I go into focus groups is, does anybody's boss in the room? Because if they are, people talk differently. And especially in a toxic environment is typically toxic because there's fear in there. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the execs up above feel that way, or nor do they want that culture that way. A lot of times at that lower level, the managers who and supervisors can create that environment totally out of your control. So what I want to do is I want to get in and get at root cause. So I'll conduct focus groups that focus on 5 why and get at 2 or 3 core issues and find out exactly what those issues are. If you got a toxic environment, honestly, I can almost predict it's going to be at the supervisor level. Okay, they're probably managing out of a Theory X style management, which is a highly command and control. Now, I work with Defense Logistics Agency. It's a military. They have command and control. That's fine. What I'm talking about is a command and control that's highly, highly punitive. Okay, so it's operating out of fear. Just do as I say, my way or the highway. And a lot of times, it's easy to turn around. The problem is they never get at that level any development whatsoever. They don't know any better, right? Where we spend most of our development budget on leadership programs is usually at the high level. You talk to the high level people, they'll actually say, I wish they would have spent that money on me back when I first became a supervisor to lay the groundwork, right? So if I'm hearing toxic, if that's what you're seeing that coming out of a plant or a facility or whatever, probably, focus in on your supervisory manager level people. And I guarantee you they will be operating out of a fear mentality, or what I always tell people, everybody knows you're the boss. You don't have to prove that you're the boss, but you do have to prove that you're the leader, right? And usually when people are out of a boss mentality, it's because it's an ego thing. They really thrive on that power. So you'll hear them say things like, I don't care whether you respect me as long as you fear me. Or, you don't have to respect me, but you have to respect the position. It's like, give me a break. In the millennial age, nowadays, they'll leave. I got one guy in a manufacturing plant just before I started coaching him, right? This guy he's got coming in, he really thinks he's a good employee. He's making $22 an hour, right? Well, he has to have a tough conversation, of course, when you described it to me. And I told him, Jeff, you probably could have done that a little bit better, But, he didn't mean anything by it. That's just what he knew. He didn't know any better. Well, guess what? The guy didn't show up the next day. And then he didn't show up the day after that. He was in getting gas, Jeff, the manager, right, a week later, and the guy's taking his money. So he gave up a $22 an hour job to work in a Speedway gas station, $9 an hour. And he also knows that the guy's raising a family, right? So people, the millennials especially, but it's all a respect thing. So if I hear, and I know this is long-winded and I'm sorry, but I love what I do, okay? But the fact is, it's probably a supervisor type thing, and it's all rooted in fear, and you just got to get respect back. But to get respect back, you got to teach it.
Thanks, Jay. And Jay is passionate about what he does. And I'll say, too, that having worked with these mid-sized and large manufacturing oil and gas companies, Jay has found that it often is this supervisory or mid-level management that's the issue, and has developed an entire coaching curriculum and program in response to that. And it's become one of our practices here at Denison. I'll say, too, just to continue on the psychological safety conversation that we began before tying it back to physical safety again. Organizations more and more, especially in a corporate context, are talking about psychological safety. That is, do employees feel as though they can share and express honest opinions about the way in which work gets done or the priorities of the organization? Do they feel as though they can take a risk and fail, which may create a great innovation or may create a loss of profit? But do they feel as though there's a safe environment to do both of those things? And those are critically important to success, because without risk, you can't innovate. And without sharing diverse perspectives and opinions, you're likely going to be heading in one direction without any challenge or consideration. And it turns out that the factor that feeds into both psychological safety and a lot of the feelings of whether or not employees can speak up is the organizational learning element of the Dennison model, which is, do employees feel as though successes and failures are viewed as opportunities to learn and improve the way work gets done and the way systems are designed? And that ties into, in the context of safety, do people feel as though they have a team orientation? Do people have their back? Is there a vision for the long term of the organization? Do they understand where it's appropriate or not appropriate to take risk to help push the vision forward? And these are all the ways in which the different aspects of the Dennison model fit together in order to produce a high-performing culture, and that balance across the model is critically important. And really, no matter what metric you're looking at, physical safety or psychological safety, you're going to see similar ties. It's just going to be different conversations and contexts in which it manifests. So as we move closer to 10:45, I just want to see if there are any final questions. And if not, please know that we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as some follow-on resources to help your own knowledge, but also the knowledge of your clients, and help push forward conversations should you have clients who are interested in improving the safety of their organizations, and so that you can make the business case for culture being a primary driver of that safe environment.
And feel free to throw my email address in there. If anybody wants to know more about anything that we talked about or just bounce ideas, you know, like I said, I love what I do. I love talking about what we do. So, and if you are on this call, that means you do it too, and probably love what you do. So, you know, feel free, just shoot me an email. And if I don't answer, it might mean that it went into spam. So just contact Zach and say, kick Jay's butt, tell him, you know, but more than likely, if I don't answer it, a lot of times it'll go into a spam folder. Right? So,
good.
Is everybody off, like mute?
So I think we'll give everybody back about 4 minutes of their day. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being a partner of Dennison Consulting. We look forward to supporting your conversations with your clients around culture and safety, or culture and whatever metrics they care most about. Because what Denison does is we take culture, we create a tangible framework and language to discuss it, and link it to performance, link it to the business of their business, so they know that culture is a business planning tool, not just a fun activity. Thanks so much.